In three, two, one. Hello there, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the first official Rewire podcast. I am your host, Coach Jesse, head coach and founder of Rewire Fitness. Today we've got a very special guest, registered dietetic technician, Jeremy Gricar. How you doing, Jeremy?
I'm doing well. Thanks for having me. It's really an honor to be featured on your podcast.
Oh, it was a pleasure. Reading through the notes that you sent me earlier, I could tell this is something that you're very passionate about. I'm super excited for you to share that knowledge with everyone here. And I guess the first question that I want to lead with is, what is a dietetic technician?
So, the dietetic technician is definitely something most, if not anyone, knows about. I didn't know about it until I became one. So, so dietetic technician, there are multiple avenues you can take to become one. You can either get your associates in science and then focus it on nutrition. Then you'll have to do kind of like an internship for, I think it's upwards of 1,000 hours. You can finally sit for your exam to become a dietetic technician. So what we can do is we can help with diet education, basically anything a dietitian does, but we need the oversight of a dietitian to write off on anything we do. So I'm currently kind of a dietitian, but I need someone to kind of say, yeah, write off on it, and it is what it is. And then the avenue I took to become one, I got my bachelor's in nutrition. Then I got my verification statement from my school that I graduated from, which then allowed me to sit for the exam right away. So I didn't have to do any of the extra hours or anything else.
Awesome. And we talked a little bit before the show, so I got an understanding of what you're going for here. But I understand this isn't your end goal. You have something else that you're aspiring and working towards. Want to dive into that a little bit?
Yeah. So the end game is to become a registered dietitian, and becoming a registered dietitian is a long, very labor-intensive process that can sometimes be very detrimental on the psyche. So first you have to go through, get your bachelor's, and then you have to apply to dietetic internships. So right now, with the increase in popularity for the degree, the current percentage rate of getting matched to a dietetic internship is 50% or lower.
Oh.
So I applied one time directly out of my bachelor's, didn't get accepted. And then that's when I took my exam to become a DTR to work, get some experience before I reapplied. And then thankfully, I got into Marshall University for a dietetic internship, which I'm currently doing.
All right. So once you become a dietitian, what job are you looking for specifically, and what will your duties be?
So end game goal for like a career would be working with athletes, sports in some fashion,
Right.
helping give dietary advice that way. But I know most avenues will probably lead through some sort of healthcare because it's what's paying and it's in hot demand right now.
Huh. Gotcha. So we had talked beforehand, and you had mentioned that there were some general guidelines that you wanted to go over. That was like the biggest thing you wanted to talk about. You want to go ahead and go into that a little bit?
Yeah, of course. So as with me before going into this degree, nutrition has been a topic that not many understand, and it's one that's definitely gaining a lot of momentum forward. So the biggest thing that I've noticed with my education and with learning more about nutrition is that a lot of the preventable diseases such as diabetes, um, cardiovascular disease, atherosclerosis, and a few others, those can definitely be prevented and minimized if proper nutrition is followed. So some guidelines to basically help a lot of those disease states in general would be like a food first mentality. So this includes getting your vitamins, your minerals, and your macronutrients, so your carbs, your fats, and your proteins from food first. What this does is it causes you to eat more, and you're more conscious of what you're putting in your body, and you're not necessarily saying, "Oh, I need this. Let's put this in there," without any regard, really. um, let's see. Another thing is to increase your whole food consumption. So this fruits, vegetables, whole grains, beans, nuts, eating your calories will be much more satisfying long term because it keeps you fuller longer. It just overwhelmingly is better for you. um, let's see. And then also cook more scratch dishes. I know a lot of people are very busy, and cooking at home can become difficult and labor intensive, but the amounts of sodium and other like minerals found inside of pre-made dishes or um, frozen meals is much greater when you're consuming things that are frequently kind of heat and eat type things.
And I do love hearing that the food first is the way to go, because too often I hear people just asking like, what kind of supplements can I take? What kind of pills? So I really like that you guys really focus on the food, because that is, in my opinion, and your more knowledgeable opinion, really the right way to go about it. So I'm very glad we see eye to eye there.
Oh yes, definitely. It's one of the biggest things I think as dietitians that we try to strive for is helping with helping improve people's relationships with food. I myself, I love food, and I'm trying to evoke that onto anyone that I touch. So,
So yeah, I completely agree with that too. One of the things that you had actually said to me a couple years ago, when I was on the paleo diet myself, and for those of you that don't know, the paleo diet is like a semi-restrictive, or it's pretty restrictive diet, where you have the mindset of, would a caveman be able to eat this food? If not, you're not allowed to eat it. So that means like no processed food, so like no cakes, no sweets, anything like that. And Jeremy, I think this is before you had even gone to school for any of this, wasn't it? When
it might have
you kind
been,
of laughed at me about it.
yeah.
And the one thing that you said that stuck out to me was that it's not really sustainable, because anything that's really that like exclusive for what you're eating, like you're gonna burn out. And sure enough, eventually I did.
How long were you on it for?
It wasn't very long. It was probably about 6 months before I finally caved and had that first cookie, and then it just kind of all went back to normal after that.
Okay. Yeah. See, whenever people go through diets, that's a similar effect for most people. They find very restrictive diets that they try to adhere to, and they restrict themselves from things that they want to eat, like the cookies, the cakes, and all that. And it creates so much animosity towards the food that it's like, oh, I'm having a cookie, I deserve it. And then it cascades, like you said, where you're eventually no longer following that diet, and it's now increased more because you restricted it for so long. So creating that healthy relationship with food, you can tell yourself, you know what, I'm going to have one cookie and then go back on your day and enjoy the rest of your day like you should.
And I wish I would have listened to you years ago when you told me that. Yeah, I think the one thing that stood out to you was that I wasn't supposed to be having any legumes. And you were like, any diet that's telling you not to have legumes is not a diet you should be on.
This is true. I love the power of legumes and beans. They are very powerful in their protein. They are great in fiber, great in complex carbohydrates, and just overall, they're fantastic little beans. So,
And that kind of brings me to one other thing that you had mentioned on one of my posts. I was talking about that low-calorie bread that I usually eat.
mm-hmm.
And you said that that wasn't the option that you usually go with, because you prefer to have more fiber in the things you're eating. And what's your reasoning behind that?
So fiber delays gastric emptying in the stomach. Same with protein and with fat. So the more that you have inside your stomach, it's going to satiate you longer. That's why when you eat meals higher in protein, higher in fat, you're actually staying full for longer. Also, fiber helps push things through your digestive tract. So they help keep your stools and everything regular and actually promote better cardiovascular health as well as decrease risks for colon cancer and stuff like that.
Huh. All right. And I guess this is kind of a natural segue into one of the questions that we had in the comments about breads. Someone had asked the difference between white bread, whole wheat, and multigrain. And honestly, it's a great question because I have no idea what the differences are. So the floor is yours.
Yeah, so this was definitely a question that should be answered because a lot of it's all within marketing and it's based upon they create all these names and these words and they make it seem like it's healthy when it's probably no different, like whole grain white bread. It's still not what you're thinking it is. So whole grain itself just refers to foods or breads in this instance that are created using whole grain of that like plant. So in this case, whole grain wheat would be using the germ, the bran, the endosperm, and all other components of that as if you found it in nature. What's frequently happened when you process wheat is it takes all that off, and then it then grinds everything up, and then it leaves that part out. So what it's actually leaving out is it's leaving out the fiber content, and it's also leaving out all the vitamins and minerals that are found within those components of that the wheat itself. So whole grain breads are going to be higher in protein. They're going to be higher in fiber. They're also going to be higher in your B vitamins and some minerals. With that being said, per volume, most whole grain breads will be higher in calories as well because it's providing more substances than your refined white breads. The next one was whole wheat. Whole wheat is still similar to whole grain, and it will still have similar benefits, if not the same benefits. So basically what it's saying is it's using the whole wheat plant, and it's not any other grains. So no other grains are apparent in there. So barley and stuff like that. So I think that's the difference between the whole grain and the whole wheat is the whole grain you can have multiple different kinds of grains found within that product. And that leads me to the multi-grain bread. So it's similar where it provides many different multi-grains and different grains in that instance. But if it doesn't say whole grain, multi-grain is still not going to be as good as whole grain bread for you.
Huh.
Let me tell you why, but it's mainly because it's not using the whole grain, so it's not using the bran and the endosperm and stuff like that, as long as it doesn't say whole grain. So it might even be enriched. So what enrichment is it takes out all that stuff from the bread, but then it adds it back into it. So all those B vitamins that have been stripped during processing are then being put back into the product so that you still get the vitamins, but you're not getting the fiber.
Okay. So now, is there any difference in the quality of those vitamins that they're adding in, or is kind of like a vitamin either way?
That's actually a really good question. I'm not sure, but in any regard, any kind of vitamin you're taking in is going to be better than no vitamin.
Oh, okay. That's definitely good to know. And thank you, because I had no idea. So if you were to give us the green flag on one of those types of breads, which is the go-to for you?
So that kind of segues into some of the other points I had. When I'm looking at bread, I'm looking at whole grains. So I really want to consume the whole grain varieties. But I'm also looking into things depending on my goals that I want for that bread. So I look into the calories per serving and then how many pieces of bread are actually per serving. When you get those larger loaves, those larger pieces of bread, you think that it's always going to be 2 slices per serving, but a lot of times for some of those larger, heftier whole grain breads, a single piece of bread is going to be 100 some calories, and that's going to be the single serving on the nutrition facts label. Another thing is to look at the fiber content. Ideally, you're looking for something between 3 and 5 grams of fiber. That's usually your good pinpoint to look at, but take caution. If you're not used to consuming lots of fiber, start very slowly and very gradually increasing your fiber per day. So if you don't, you're going to have some gastrointestinal distress, you're going to have bloatings and gas, and it's just going to be pretty uncomfortable. So that takes me into how much you should be consuming. So for men, most men should be consuming between 30 and 40 grams per day, and for most women, this should be between 20 and 30 grams per day.
All right. And aside from breads, where's a good place to get those fibers?
Fruits and vegetables, those are usually very high, are pretty decent in your fiber, and then also beans and legumes. But to kind of give you an idea of what fiber is the undigestible part of plants. So the husks and the rinds and stuff like that on plants are going to give you higher fiber content.
Okay. So that kind of leads me into my biggest issue with like juice cleanses and things like that. Because when you do that, you are stripping like all the fiber from the fruits and vegetables, are you not?
Correct. So I was never the biggest fan of the juicing trends. I think they're ridiculous. Eat the whole fruit, eat the whole vegetable, and you're also, like you said, you're going to get the benefits of the fiber and everything else, and it's also going to, it's going to satiate you longer. So you're going to be satisfied from eating 15 carrots instead of versus putting them in through a juicer, maybe getting a cup and a half worth of juice.
So that's a no for the juicing. What about skinny teas? Big skinny tea guy?
Only on Saturdays, maybe.
Only on Saturdays. All right. So before anyone gets too lost, there's been a couple words you've been throwing around that I want to like really get some definitions behind. Those have been the macronutrients. I've heard you say fats, carbs, and proteins. Do you mind diving into those and explaining what the difference between them are and what their job roles are?
Of course. So yeah, like you said, the macronutrients are going to be your carbohydrates, your fats, and your proteins. So to get into it and just be as simplistic as possible, your carbohydrates are used for energy. So these are broken down and then create energy within your metabolic processes. And then you've got protein. Protein's used for structure, so build your cells, and it helps build your organs and all that. It's used for muscle. It's used to help create hormones. It's helped with nutrient transport between cells, and it's to help with enzyme production, to help you break other stuff down, and it's also to help with fluid balance. You know, some people don't realize the impact that protein has, and after reading all those, it's kind of eye-opening, I can imagine. And then the last one is fat. People always thought fat's bad for you, but fat is actually very good for providing energy. So for normal day use or normal day activities, that is going to be our primary energy source. And then it also helps with hormone creation and production.
All right, and I understand there are a couple different kinds of fats. Are there some that are better or worse than others?
Yeah, so there are saturated fats. Those are primarily from animal sources. And then there's also unsaturated fats. Give me a second. Let me see where this was in my notes. So the difference between them basically is summarized by seeing how they react at room temperature. Saturated fatty acids are going to be solids at room temperature. So your butter, your lard, and stuff of that nature, your coconut oil. And then your unsaturated fatty acids are going to be liquid at room temperature. So your olive oil, your canola oil, safflower oil, and avocado oil and stuff like that. Um, so saturated fatty acids, um, they're going to be higher in cholesterol. They're going to be less, or they should be consumed a little less compared to unsaturated fatty acids. I think the number that you should reach for is 10% or less of your calories should be from saturated fats.
Okay.
So yeah.
And now I've been doing some reading, and it seems like every time I find an article, it's telling me something different about the link between dietary cholesterol and your body cholesterol. Would you mind explaining what the most recent data is telling us about that? Is there really that strong of a link?
So currently, the most recent data suggests that there's little to no correlation between your blood cholesterol and your dietary intake cholesterol. But that from also things that I've read is that it's kind of person dependent. But for the vast majority of people, it's not because of their intake of cholesterol that their cholesterol is high. I know that sometimes if you overconsume carbohydrates, the fact that those get changed into fatty acids in the body if you overconsume, that they increase your lipid profile because they're then fatty acids circulating in the blood.
That is crazy. It just blows my mind how like fast we're learning new things and even correcting things that we used to think were so much better for us. Like people thought that margarine was going to be the best substitute for butter, and that didn't really turn out so well. Are there any big misconceptions that you run into just talking to people and they say one thing that just drives you nuts?
People believing that coconut oil is the next superfood was one that really irked me in the last couple, like 10 years. So the fact that recent research that just came out recently that I saw, it's actually not as great as people once thought it was, and it actually increases your LDL, your low density lipoproteins, and basically those are your bad cholesterol in your blood. So it's just as, I guess, bad for you as your saturated fats in that comparison.
You're breaking my heart here, Jeremy. I love coconut oil, but that's good to know. And that's something that I would have just gone on continuing thinking was totally fine.
Yeah.
So is there a good type of oil that has like kind of stood the test of time that you would recommend using?
Through and through, olive oil, extra virgin olive oil has shown to be very beneficial. Avocado oil is proving to be pretty beneficial as well. It's a polyunsaturated fatty acid. But, it really depends on your application. If you're using it to cook with, it's very beneficial to find an oil that has a high smoke point. So what this means is as you heat that oil, it starts to radicalize and start to it's not denature, but it changes the composition of the oil, and then it starts to smoke. So this can increase risks for free radical production and what's the word I'm looking for? Can't think of the word, but basically oils that are going to be high in smoke points are avocado oil, surprisingly enough, coconut oil. Then you got G, which is clarified butter. Canola oil has a pretty high smoke point, same with peanut oil. Those are the ones I can think of off the top of my head.
So those are typically the oils that are used to deep fry, or am I getting this backwards?
So yeah, plant-based oils are frequently dry. I use avocado oil or ghee and frequently olive oil to saute. even though something a little higher than olive oil is better to saute. I think olive oil smoke point is 325 degrees versus avocados is between 400 and 450.
Okay. And I love that you just know this kind of stuff off the top of my head. It kind of makes me, or reminds me that not only nutrition is one of your passions, but cooking is as well. And I think those two things go hand in hand with each other pretty well. Did one come before the other, or was it kind of like a combination?
It's a good question. I'm not quite sure. I started cooking a lot while in college and enjoying it. I enjoyed it growing up in high school, but I never thought about nutrition until um, college wrestling season. So I think the cooking came first, and then once they both were my vision, they kind of simultaneously came up together.
Gotcha. And when you first went to college, was like a dietitian, was that your goal straight off the bat?
No, but I did want to help people. So I first wanted to go into psychology,
Oh,
but I ended up falling asleep in all of my basic psych courses and realized that in order to do anything worth substance in psychology, you needed your PhD, and I wasn't willing to go to school for that long.
yeah. So when was it that you decided that dietitian, dietetics was the route you wanted to go down?
I would say about halfway or three quarters of the way through my freshman year at Luther College. Um, I was part of the wrestling team there, and one of my freshman classmates, who was varsity at the time, our 125 pounder, would frequently binge eat and binge drink on the weekends, and he would see himself 15, 20, 25 pounds heavy on a Monday, and then Tuesday, Thursday, he would have to get down all that weight. And the only way he'd do it is through starvation, extreme hydration, and then extreme dehydration. So he would basically deplete all his electrolytes, deplete his hydration status, and not give himself anything. And it really impacted his performance.
And that is probably the biggest example and biggest reasons why I never wrestled in high school. Most of my friends were on the wrestling team, and it looked fun. And it's like the most pure idea of a sport that I could think of because it's just you versus one person. But I couldn't get over the fact that I was watching all my friends starve themselves. And one of my friends literally starved himself bald and wasn't able to grow hair on his head because how much weight he cut. And especially since it was right after football season, where the guys are supposed to be at their heaviest, and then they go down to wrestling, where they are at their absolute smallest, which is why I was super excited when I saw this program that you're starting with your Instagram page with your Pin to Win Nutrition. Do you mind bringing that up at all?
Yeah, definitely. So I think with my background of wrestling and with it being my driving force to get into sports nutrition and nutrition in itself, I wanted to give back and help athletes reach their potential through maximizing their nutritional profile. So I'm helping get information out there to make sure that nutrition becomes more of a well-known science, but also to discourage the extreme weight cutting measures that most athletes have been utilizing for years. Um, I know I'm currently working with one of our athletes. I bet him on a weight weight stabilization and kind of performance diet right now to help maximize muscle growth. But when we get back towards the season, when we get back towards school year, I'm going to taper that down and start transitioning him into um, getting him down to his goal weight, as well as getting him ready to have the nutrients that he needs to perform during practice and competitions alike.
That's incredible. I'm really looking forward to seeing what the results from this are, because at least all the wrestlers I was friends with, they seemed like they were always running on empty. And I'd always thought in my head, if they were like at the weight they should be and not totally starving themselves and dehydrated, that they'd be able to perform so much better. So the high school is definitely lucky to have you to really help instill that as a new mindset. So it's just incredible.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
So that, and for those of you who don't know, I don't think I introduced this at the start, but Jeremy is an assistant wrestling coach here in Harvard for the high school team. Are you on the varsity team or junior varsity, or is it all together?
So we basically all coach together, but yeah, I would just say we're all just varsity and varsity or JV coaches alike, and we'll go to wherever we need to go coach at. So
That's awesome. All right. So while we're on the topic of talking about students and kids, one of the questions that we had asked of us comes from one of my clients. She actually wanted to know what she could do to continue eating healthy now that her kids are home. So with this virus, schools are shut down, everyone's at home. What advice would you give to a parent who's also in charge of providing meals for their kids?
yeah, I don't know. This is a great question. So part of this makes me agree with a lot of the consensus in the nutrition community right now is be comfortable. Don't try and do things to make you more stressed because this is definitely a high time of stress. So if that means you're going to eat more comfort food, if that means you're going to eat in excess of calories, as long as you are not constantly stressed, as long as you're not going crazy, just be okay with it for now, and we can handle it later. But if this is a time that you really want to start making some changes, I did put together some healthy changes that could happen. So any home cooked meal, no matter what it is like I kind of said at the beginning, is going to be better than prepackaged frozen meals. So this can come from anything: canned foods, canned vegetables, frozen foods, frozen vegetables. But sometimes when you use canned foods, they're going to be higher in sodium because it helps preserve the foods for longer. Just one quick tip is to take your vegetables or whatever you're using before you eat it. Go ahead and put it in a strainer and run some cold water over it because that will decrease the amount of sodium in that product before you use it. Let's see. Another point was, and a little technical difficulties. All right, another point I made was to make sure to structure your meals with 50% of your plate of fruits and or vegetables, 25% of your plate from grains or starchy vegetables, and then 25% of your plate from lean protein. So if you kind of look at it, there's the circle, half and up will be fruits and vegetables, and then you split that other half of your plate with starches and proteins.
And then you mentioned lean protein sources, right?
Correct. So lean protein, this is going to be, preferably chicken, turkey, other poultry sources, pork. For the most part, pork is pretty lean. And then ground beef, ideally above 90%, but I know it's expensive. So especially in times like now, lean would be great. But if you don't have it, it is what it is. And then there's also plant proteins that are very lean. You've got your quinoa, you've got your nuts, your chickpeas, you've got your beans, soy products, tofu, and stuff like that. All are very viable options.
And then what about those picky eaters that don't want to eat vegetables?
Okay, so for those picky eaters, I've actually had personal experience getting some picky eaters to try some vegetables that they previously told me they did not like. And it all came down to making sure it was cooked properly, so you're not overcooking the crap out of it to where it's mushy, but also making sure you're seasoning it. Seasoning really helps the palatability of food. So one of my go-tos for seasoning any kind of vegetable is going to be olive oil, salt, pepper, um, garlic powder, and a little oregano. And then another one I like to do is also salt and a little bit of lemon pepper.
Sounds pretty good to me. That's actually the combination that I use more frequently than not. Big fan of the garlic powder, garlic salt kind of thing. So I'm right there with you. And
Exactly.
what about snacking? What would you say about having snacks around for the kids?
So if your kids frequently snack and you don't want them to be grabbing chips, you don't want them to be grabbing granola bars or things of that nature, as difficult as it might be, just try not to have it in the house. Especially now with most people being out of work, try to buy things that are going to be more impactful nutritionally. So this means fresh fruit, dried fruit, canned fruit. If you're getting canned fruit, make sure it's in water and or 100% juice.
So glad
You
you
know,
said that part.
we don't want any syrups. Um, and what this does is, if they're looking through the pantry, if they're looking through the fridge because they're bored and they see all that's available or as fruits, if they take it, great. If they don't, then they probably weren't hungry. They just wanted something salty. So
Perfect. Those are some great tips there. So the vegetables might not be bad. You're just not cooking them right and have healthier snacks.
it could be it. Yeah, a lot of the times when people tell me they don't like certain fruits or foods, it's a texture thing.
Mm,
Um,
okay.
Part of it's also a taste thing. So if you are able to positively influence either of those to make it more palatable for a certain person, you got to do what you got to do sometimes.
All right. Well, I think those are some good tips that just about anyone can follow. And I totally agree with them myself, especially the boredom thing or like looking for something salty, not necessarily because you're hungry. Because especially now with us being kind of shelter in place, locked down at home, it gets to be so easy walking by that pantry to just grab something.
I
It's like,
completely agree because that was me at the beginning of this. I was taking snacks left and right, and I saw undesirable weight gain. I mean, granted, I wasn't too obsessed about it, but she's like, wow, I need to stop going and grabbing chips and salsa, and I need to stop going and grabbing some pretzels. I need to stop this, and you know, taking 4 handfuls of nuts. It's almost 1,000 calories depending on the handful.
and that kind of brings to light my favorite thing I've heard talking from you is that you're kind of implying that it is okay to be human, especially in times like these. That's not the end of the world if you overeat on some things. And I just love hearing that, especially from someone of a dietetic background.
Of course. So from a lot of my um, going through the studies and everything, and some of the biggest things that have stood out to me is the effects of oxidative stress and just stress in general. So yeah, it's great to be all healthy, but if it's causing you a world of stress, I don't want you to follow it. More times than not, that stress is not only going to impact you negatively mentally, but it'll cause a spiraling downturn eventually. So, what I mean by that is, like I said earlier, if you want a piece of cake, go ahead and give yourself a piece of cake. Um, Stress is one of those things that most people have difficult times overcoming. And if what you're doing nutritionally is increasing that stress, let's go back and kind of find some different lifestyle changes and find things that work for you so that they can in turn be sustainable.
And that's the word I was looking for, sustainable right there. You're just making me so happy talking to you, Jeremy. I'm glad all my ideas are being reinforced through you. I love it.
Of course.
So, bringing up that it's okay to have a piece of cake, kind of reminded me of another question that we got in the comments about foods high in sugar, why we're drawn to those foods, why they almost feel addictive at certain points, and safe alternatives to sugar. Is there anything you wanted to go over as far as that goes?
Of course. So I'm not a psychologist, so I can't speak on the addictive factor of sugar. That's not something I'm well versed in, so I'm going to be upfront about that.
Thank you.
I can speak on the latter part of that question was how to decrease sugar in the diet. So some things to keep in mind, like I said, as with anything, moderation is key to healthy, sustainable diets. Um, like I was saying, if you desire to have a sugary treat, don't go out and have an entire sleeve of Oreos. Limit yourself to 4 Oreos. Give yourself a little taste and be okay with it. Have a little bit of discipline and saying enough's enough, but enough to get your satisfaction in. Um, some ways to help decrease that would be, you know, substitute your sweet tooth with fruit alternatives. That's one thing I usually do is I'm not big on sugary things, but I do enjoy fruits a lot. So in my morning smoothie, I've got a blend of berries and cherries, and that's satisfying for me all day to get over my sweet tooth if I ever have one. And then another part is to make sure you read the nutrition facts label. I know a lot of people look at it and don't necessarily know what they're looking at, but I know that I think the FDA is the governing, it's either USDA or FDA governing over the facts label, but they now made it mandatory that they have to put in added sugars onto the label. So if we're looking at that, we want to make sure that 0 added sugars are put into our products. That guarantees that whatever sugar is on that label was just a part of the cooking process or a part of the ingredients that are within it. And then also looking at the ingredients, this is key too because there's a lot of things that people put in there that don't necessarily say sugar, but are derivatives sugar or basically are nothing but sugar. So some of those things are going to be dextrose, sucrose, maltodextrin, corn syrup, brown sugar, barley malt, confectioner sugar, fructose, galactose, glucose, any kind of honey, any syrup, a nectar, and some of these, they are different derivatives of carbohydrates. So you've got your glucose, your fructose, your lactose, maltose, and stuff like that. So it's just kind of understanding exactly what it is you're reading that helps you make a better decision.
Okay. Yeah, that totally makes sense. One thing I've always been confused by, there are so many different types of sugars, as you were just mentioning. So what makes the sugar in an apple better than the sugar in a lollipop?
So the sugar in a lollipop is going to be made of sucrose. Um, I got to get my basic nutrition knowledge correct here. So let me open them up. Sucrose, I believe, is made from glucose molecules and come on, glucose and fructose. So you
Okay.
add the sugar found in fruits with a thing of glucose. This is going to be most commonly your table sugars and stuff like that. And then there's maltose. Maltose is found in a lot of your barley products and malt products like beer. I don't know, maybe some breads, but I don't know any products that still use malt unless, yeah, so that's a little beyond me. You get lactose. Lactose is your milk sugar. Moving beyond that, you get your oligosaccharides, which are um, sugar is made of 3 or up to 10 sugar molecules in a row. These are going to be difficult to understand, so I'm just going to kind of bypass those ones.
Sounds good.
They're just they're not as prevalent, but in certain points of your health, they may need to be avoided, but that's a topic for another time. And then you get your starches and stuff. Those are your polysaccharides that have long chains of glucose and other sugar molecules.
So do they behave differently in the body? Is the sugar from an apple going to be better for you, or I should say less bad for you than the lollipop, or do they all kind of behave the same, but you get the benefits of the fiber from the apple, which makes it the better choice?
So fructose and all those, they are simple sugar or simple carbohydrates. However, how fructose is metabolized in the body is going to be different than your glucose and your lactose and galactose. So fructose itself, a carrier takes it to the liver to be processed upon absorption, whereas other parts have to go through the intestine, and they go through a rigmarole. It's a little more longer of a process than the fructose. So it's not necessarily better or worse for you. It's more of understanding how it's utilized in the body and metabolized. But again, that's very intricate and becomes very difficult to understand.
Gotcha. And now I don't want to dive too deep in here and just make this study about sugar, but does that why simple sugars spike your blood sugar quicker, because they're being directly metabolized by the liver and not having to go through that entire process?
Correct. That's part of the reason. Another part of the reason is when you think of complex carbohydrates being a long chain of sugars put together, and then you've got your simple carbohydrates that are maybe 2 or 3 put together, the amount of energy needed and the amount of digestion needed to break down 2 molecules are less than needing to break down 65 to 1,000 sugar molecules. So that's why your simple carbohydrates, when they're ingested and absorbed, they're going to spike that real quick versus your longer chains, which will start to be absorbed slower.
Okay. So the longer chain actually require more energy to be broken down. Is that
Over time? Correct.
okay? Awesome. So that kind of plays into like the thermal effect of food, actually burning calories while you're eating, that kind of thing.
Yes, exactly.
Which kind of actually brings me to another question we had in the comments about finding your caloric needs.
Yes.
You want to take on that question?
I would love to take on that question. So let me pull up that section real quick. So the gold standard for finding your caloric needs, which is something most of us do not have access to, nor do we have the money to do it, would be via indirect calorimetry. Basically, what this does is you put on a mask and it measures CO2 output while you're going through exercises and stuff like that, and it will then extrapolate numbers based upon the information being fed to it. Although, like I said, it's the gold standard. It can be very expensive for any of that kind of equipment or to get yourself tested with that equipment. So that takes me to the most efficient and effective way for you at home. This is going to require you keeping a very accurate food log. So measure if you can measure, weigh it if you can weigh it. Any bites of things, any I only had 1 cookie here, or only had a couple kernels of popcorn here. Be as accurate as possible, because what this will do is this will help set us up to get an overall kind of look at how much you're taking in. So what I would do is I would track for about a month while also taking weights once a week, and make sure your weights are at the same time of day. Be consistent in what you're wearing, and make sure if you're if you do it right in the morning, make sure that if you're doing it before using the restroom, do that every time, or afterwards, vice versa. So then what we do with those calories is will kind of depend on what happens with your weight throughout that month. If you maintain your weight and you find your average calories, that is going to probably be your most accurate without indirect calorimetry to figure out your maintenance calories. So in order to lose weight from there, go ahead and subtract 500 calories from that per day and maintain that. Um, if you average a 500 calorie deficit for an entire week, that equals about a pound a week. And then the same thing for trying to gain weight. You want to do the same thing.
So same thing about 500 positive or?
Yep, 500 positive.
Okay, awesome. What would you say to people who are looking for faster results, so they want to go at a more extreme caloric deficit? Say someone wants to forget about the 500 number and go 1,000 negative. Would that be a good idea, a bad idea? What would be your thoughts?
So, of course, it would help with weight loss and it may make it happen quicker, but that kind of goes into what we've been saying this whole podcast so far, sustainability. If you go gung-ho, cold turkey right into decreasing by 1,000 calories, most oftentimes you're going to be hungry. You're going to be limiting yourself by so much that it's not going to be sustainable in the long run. And there have actually been studies that showed while using most diets that are out there today, 85% of people gain the weight back within a year after their weight loss. I think it's like 90% of people within 2 years and like 90% within 3. And that's not only gaining the weight back, but a lot of people also put on more weight after that. So that's why sustainability is key. Find something you can definitely adhere to and stick with for a long time, if not life.
That's good. That kind of brings up another question of something that I hear a lot, but kind of has, in my opinion, is kind of overdiagnosed, is that like starvation mode. Do you know how many calories, how little of calories you have to be before your body starts freaking out like that?
So the minimum amount of calories that majority of people need just to satisfy normal daily activities, normal body functions. This isn't even, let's say you're laying in bed for 24 hours. You need 1,200 calories just for your body to do the work it needs to keep you alive. So starvation mode, one thing I kind of equate that with is the new trend of intermittent fasting. So do I believe there's benefits to fasting? I'm not sure there's a consensus right now in the literature, but what intermittent fasting helps with is it helps manipulate your calorie consumption over the course of 24 hours. So like I was saying earlier, if you're eating large meals that have protein, fat, and all that together, you're going to stay full longer. So if you give yourself 8 hours to feed and you're trying to get in all those calories, it can become difficult to actually overconsume within that amount of time unless you're just not choosing the right foods to be eaten.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense to me. Let's see. Now, another question that I remember seeing in the comments, this one was actually kind of hit home a little bit, but it was one of our members had talked about that he found out now that he is at that age where I believe it was his father suffered his first heart attack. And he's been really taking his health seriously. He's been training with us, usually working out about twice a day. And he was asking about any supplements or vitamins that he should be taking to ensure that he is being as healthy as can be. What kind of advice would you give to someone like that?
So from what I remember from that question was he was having difficulty staying with his vitamin regimen, and even when he wasn't necessarily seeing the benefits. So what I have to say is make sure you're consuming a diet that's going to be high in variety in your fruits and vegetables. Make sure you're consuming your whole grains. Make sure you're staying hydrated. Make sure that you're getting your lean protein sources in, and also make sure that you're continuing with the physical activity. So as long as you are consuming a diet that's very varied, that supplies most, if not all, the nutrients that you need from vitamins that you're taking supplementally, the supplements may not be beneficial. But if you find yourself having difficulty consuming proper amounts of a certain vitamin or mineral, supplementation may actually benefit you, but it really depends person to person and kind of what your intake looks like. So I definitely recommend kind of reaching out to a nutrition professional to get your intake kind of assessed to further answer that question better.
And I figured that's what you're going to say, because that kind of goes along with your whole food first theme, which I'm glad you're consistent. And it kind of reminds me of another question that we got in the comments. It was about inflammation.
Yes.
Are there any good food sources that you know of that you'd recommend to reduce inflammation? This specific case was for arthritis pain and inflammation.
Yeah, so I went through the research this morning and I found a few things. So from a general nutritional standpoint, decreasing inflammation can be done by eating healthier fats, by consuming essential fatty acids such as omega-3, which can be found in walnuts, chia seeds, flaxseed, various fatty fish, and then even your krill oil, your fish oil, and other supplements like that. And then also another thing that has been very common to reduce inflammation has been cherries, believe it or not. So in a recent review of the literature, cherries effectively decreased oxidative stress markers in 8 out of 10 studies. They reduced inflammation in 11 out of 16 studies. They decreased exercise-induced muscle soreness in 8 out of 9 studies. They decreased blood pressure in 5 out of 7 studies. They improved arthritis soreness in 5 out of 5 studies. And they also improved sleep in 4 out of 4 studies. So given those numbers, cherries seem like a pretty good thing to use for inflammation. But one thing to note is those studies were done over the course of about 2 weeks, and it involved a consumption of 45 to 270 cherries roughly per day.
All right.
So maybe I don't know. I don't know how to extrapolate that information from there. So yes, it shows benefits. Will it be positive in lower doses? That's probably going to be a case-by-case basis. But some great ways to incorporate cherries into your diet in cost-effective manners would be to add them to smoothies or to trail mix or just eat them plain. And Costco actually has large bags of dried cherries that you can purchase.
Huh. Now, one thing just to make a little note to watch out for in those dried fruits, look to make sure they're not adding a ton of sugar on top of that too.
Correct. Yeah.
As Jeremy mentioned earlier with the added sugar label.
Correct.
Now, a lot of other food sources that I've seen like thrown around for inflammation have been like turmeric and collagen. Where do you sit on those things?
So I looked into collagen. Current research right now is kind of inconclusive, but for the price of collagen supplementation, I would personally suggest against it and instead turns towards diets that are higher in your fruits and vegetables. Increase your vitamin mineral intake that way, especially vitamin C. Vitamin C's one of their main roles is to actually increase collagen and muscle fiber synthesis. So maybe that can effectively help with joint health. So if your arthritis is getting bad, I don't know if it's rheumatoid arthritis, because if it's rheumatoid arthritis, then it becomes a different ballpark that we need to be playing with.
All right. Thank you for the answer on that. Now, a personal one I've got for you. I've got a lot of people training with me here, and as we mentioned a little earlier about meal timing doesn't seem to be super important for the average person. But if I've got members that are training twice a day, does your meal timing come into play for those people?
Yeah, let me touch back on that because I forgot to touch on turmeric. So
Oh, okay. Yeah, sorry.
that was my bad. But yes, studies have shown that turmeric does have anti-inflammatory properties, and that taking it can actually benefit with inflammation. So with most supplementation, individual results will definitely vary. But if you do decide to supplement with turmeric, so it was shown that safe consumption for humans was up to 500 milligrams twice daily. And then one great way to increase turmeric is to eat a diet higher in Indian cuisine, because it's a very common spice used in Indian cuisine.
Interesting.
Yeah. But so to touch on meal timing, especially with those that are working out more than once a day, meal timing for performance purposes is very imperative. If you notice yourself feeling weak or fatigued during your workouts, make sure that we need to then increase our carbohydrate consumption. Simple carbohydrates are going to be better for with 30 minutes to up to an hour before workouts. So this will include fruits. It'll include, dare I say it, candies, some fruit juices, stuff like that. And then if you're thinking about in the advance, so within 2 to 3 hours before a workout, that's when you should primarily be eating your larger meals that have protein, fat, and complex and simple carbohydrates in it.
All right, awesome. Pretty good answers there. And I believe we had gotten to all the questions that were in the comments. Were there any more that you had seen written down there?
One that I remember was nutrition for those at the age of 65 or older.
Oh, yes.
So actually, with my work experience, I was a nursing home food service director working as a dietetic technician for 3 years. So I've got a lot of work-related experience working with older individuals. So that being said, some things that you can do to maximize your health at later age is to emphasize your lean protein intake. This helps prevent muscle wasting and or muscle mass degradation that occurs over time. It's just a common occurrence that happens with older age. But as long as you're consuming within zero point 0.6 to zero point 0.8 grams of protein per pound of body weight. So if to do an example, if you're about 165 pounds, putting this into terms of grams daily, that would be 99 to 132. But with that being said, I know as you get older, your appetite decreases significantly. I know that sometimes chewing proteins can cause larger amounts of energy, so you're getting tired quicker from chewing so much. So if it helps, eating more small meals throughout the day versus the three conventional meals can help definitely get in your protein content that way. Another thing that was pretty prevalent in the research lately is that for older individuals to help increase their muscle protein synthesis and decrease the effects of muscle degradation, a supplement of 40 grams of casein protein before bedtime showed to have positive effects.
All right. Are there any other key nutrients that they should be looking for in their meals?
Yeah, so along with protein, um, adequate calcium intakes for older individuals is between 1,200 milligrams daily to 2,500 milligrams daily. Um, this is most prominently seen in dairy, but you can also get calcium from dark leafy greens and a few other plant sources as well. Um, let's see. Uh, Eating habits should be individualized per any existing acute or chronic disease states. So if you notice or you are diagnosed with a certain disease state, make sure to reach out to a healthcare professional, predominantly a dietitian, to then factor in that into your daily intake. And then there are also some vitamins and minerals that are beneficial for older individuals. The current uh, research suggests that supplementation of vitamin D3 in intakes of 800 IU or more daily will help improve your overall quality of life. This can also be found in foods such as liver, eggs, fatty fish such as salmon, haddock, cod, trout, sardines, and canned tuna, as well as mushrooms or fortified dairy. But also another natural way of getting in your vitamin D is to increase your time spent in the sun. Of course, wear your sunscreen, make sure you're protected. But sunlight actually gets converted into vitamin D inside your body. Uh, the second vitamin that was shown to be beneficial was vitamin B12. This is typically seen in lower amounts in older individuals because of less frequent protein consumption. So an ideal intake for B12 would be 2.4 micrograms per day, and they can be found in foods such as fortified foods or fortified cereals. It can be found in supplements. It can also be found in meat, fish, poultry, eggs, milk, and dairy. If you notice yourself still not consuming much of either of those or any of those multivitamin or supplementation of that specific vitamin or mineral may be beneficial.
All right. And I assume that not all supplement companies are created equal as far as making vitamins. Are there any off the top of your head that you would recommend over others?
So for vitamins and minerals, I haven't done much research to find which brands are better than others. I personally use Nature Made, I think. It's the one from Walgreens. But
Okay.
there's um, a thing called NSF for sport. It's for verifying that the ingredients in that supplement are free of banned substances, but are also the ingredients list is 100% accurate. So if you go to that website, they definitely have beneficial vitamins and minerals.
And what did you say that was again? NSF?
Yes, NSF for sport.
Okay, so any athletes who are supplementing like with a pre-workout or anything for performance should definitely check that out to make sure they're not going to get busted for an illegal substance.
Correct. And then if we're talking about athletes, there's another one called Trusted, or yeah, I think it's Trusted Choice or Trust for Sport. And then I forget the other one. There's only like two or three. These are third company advisory, or yeah, they're just not part of the supplement company itself, but they take on and make sure that everything's pure for all these supplements.
All right. Awesome. That is definitely good to know. That'll be a good resource for a lot of our younger athletes.
Of course.
And Jeremy, I believe that is all the questions that I have for you. Was there anything else that you'd like to share with our audience?
Um, I appreciate all the questions. They were fantastic, and it kind of gives me an idea of the overall understanding of nutrition that most people currently possess, and kind of some of the things they're curious about. I am more than happy to answer anyone else's questions if they want to reach out to me personally via Facebook or Instagram. So yeah.
All right. If they were looking to find your Instagram page, either personally or your Pin to Win Nutrition, where would they find you?
So Pin to Win Nutrition would be just search that in the Instagram. And then my personal Facebook is under Jeremy Mitchell. I frequently comment on a lot of Rewire Fitness's posts. So if you want to find me there, you can go ahead and do that.
All right. Thank you so much, Jeremy, and thank you for your time. Definitely have a lot of things that I'd like to dive into in the future, but I've already taken about an hour of your time up here. So I'm very grateful. I'm sure everyone watching is too. Stay safe, and thank you.
Thanks for having me. Take care.